Hi guys, welcome to the Lore Studios. This is another episode of Android programming. We are still on the Android Sync Adapter. This time we'll be talking majorly about the Sync Adapter class, which helps us to get data from the Cloud API using the HTTP connection. And this is actually going to run in the background thread so that it's not going to block the UI. It's also going to help us to save the same data gotten from the cloud to the SQLite database with the help of the content resolver of the content provider, so that we're going to have data for offline use. So let's get started in this Sync Adapter class. Right here in Android Studio, we'll be heading straight to the Sync Adapter class, which houses in the Sync package. And let me just give you a rundown on the classes we had earlier. The service, which we've done in the previous part. Authenticator. We have our provider, that's where we have the insert movies helper method to actually insert to the SQLite database. Our DB helper to actually declare the columns in the table, and our contract, which binds all these with the authority and the URI. We'll be focusing on the Sync Adapter. Let's get a rundown how this works. This is where the engine is, where we have to communicate with the data in the cloud, and at the same time have our intervals to sync, so that we'll keep on having fresh data continually. We have to create an interval which actually runs in 60 seconds, like say 3 hours interval. It depends on how quickly you want to pick data. And we have our content resolver to actually communicate with the SQL, the provider. But before we move further, we need to extend the abstract threaded sync adapter. This is actually going to make us implement the onPerformSync method, which is actually going to run throughout in the background. So let's get started. We instantiated the content resolver in the movies sync adapter, which actually going to make this triggered anytime we need it. We call it. And firstly, we have parameters right there in the performSync method, which houses the account, the extras, the authority, provider. So those are the sync results. So those are the callbacks we'll be expecting throughout the onPerformSync method. Firstly, we call on the delete method right there in the provider to actually empty the content URI. So we're going to continually have a fresh kind of data before we even start to pass in the JSON and others. We have a log to start sync. We declare the buffer reader object. We pass that to null at start. The URL connection that we connects to the APIs. We also have a container for the JSON string, which is the response that we'll be getting as the full data. We have a try and catch block that will run the connection, also pass the buffer reader object. At the same time, we're actually going to pass the string of all the data out for use, where we get to iterate and do other aspects. And we need to catch some exceptions along the line, which will have the IO exception, JSON exception. Those two exceptions must be catched. And let's quickly look at the container of the try. In the try container, we have the base URL that points down to the API, and we need to build up the API whereby we need the API key. as the string builder, which we'll be using to build up the URI of this particular API. We pass the forecast base URL and we build upon that on the parameter we got from the API key, which you did here, and we convert that to a usable string. We log that to let us have the valid URL link, so we know we are right on course. We call the HTTP URL connection. About we open up the connection, we have the read timeout and the connect timeout as well. So we set a kind of a minute, because this will be converted to milliseconds, for that to be open up. So we created time for the connection, and we set the request method, which is the get. We can as well post if you are passing data from the content provider down to the service. So we post, but right now we're getting. We created the input stream, which actually gets the input stream from the URL connection, and we've actually declared the buffer by instantiating the stream buffer. So we are also checking if it's null before we pass to the buffer reader. About we get the input stream right there, and the UTF format, which is the readable format for data type. Now we iterate through this reader using the read line to actually read each line of the JSON callback we get, and we check if the buffer length is 0. If it's 0, it's going to be empty, so no need to pass the data. Just some check there before we finally convert the buffer to string, and we have a string JSON which will be passing to the get movies data method. That's the helper method that will actually decode and decompile more on the JSON data we got back. So these are the exceptions I've declared earlier. If we can have an IO exceptions, which we actually log that to see, and also the JSON, if it's not well formed, we have to catch that as well. Let's get to look at the get movies data, which actually gets the string we passed into it, and we threw an exception, which is the JSON exception for these, because we need to decompile the JSON. Now we need to declare the keys we're looking at. This is an object of an array, and this is an array with the results, as is the array of all the movies we have, which has primitive types in it, in each of the objects, which we'll be iterating through to get the list of all results we're looking at, whereby we have the title, user rating, poster part, and the plot synopsis, which we have their keys we've gotten from the API. Now we need to try to create a try and catch block here as well, so that we'll be able to catch the JSON exceptions over here while decompiling, because we need to iterate through each of the array we are having. Actually have the JSON object, which actually gets the object, which is the forecast JSON string we have. Now we need to call the JSON array, because we are having an array from the results, which we have as the movies string we declared here. So to iterate through an array, we need a for loop, whereby we have the counter variable and the arguments to check the length of the array we're having, and the iteration, which we keep getting until we get to the last object in the loop. During the process, we need the title, the user rating, and poster part and plot, which we now have their corresponding data type. For user rating, that's a double, and we get the details of the JSON object, which we're getting back from the get JSON object and its index. So that is actually going to identify each of the objects we get back from the array. In the process, we need to actually extract the values, whereby we get the string of the title, the user rating, poster path, and we pass it to the variable we've just created over here. Now we need the content values because we are trying to wrap this data back to the provider so that we have that saved in the SQLite database, which we need to call the columns of each of these appropriate strings and double will get back, which is the title, user rating, poster path, synopsis, and we pass their corresponding values as the parameters we are putting right into the content values objects. Now we trigger the content resolver, which we've actually declared from the adapter constructor, which has been triggered to get the content resolver to insert all the values we have based on the content URI of the contract that actually binds all these inserts. Let's log this out so that we'll be able to know the callback, the length of the movies array we add back, and we catch the exceptions gracefully. Now we need to configure the sync, which we declare the context in sync interval and the flex time as the 3 parameters. And we have the authority and the account because we're trying to create an account as well with our sync adapter. And this is checking the SDK version if it's greater than or equals to the KitKat. Is enabled to inexact timers in our periodic sync to actually get the sync done, and the content resolver also requests the sync. So these are our helper method to have the sync adapter sync immediately, to use the account service. This syncs immediately, whereby we call the resolver, the sync extras, expedite, and the manual. Another helper method down there to actually get the fake account to be used with the sync adapter, or make a new one if the fake account doesn't exist. If we make a new account, we call the onAccount created method. So we initialize things. This onAccount created method, since we have created an account, to configure the periodic sync and also set sync automatically to actually make it automated. So we have the finally that do a sync to get things started. That's fine. We need our service to also trigger the sync adapter, whereby we override the onBinder. So for that, the iBinder, we need to override that, and in the onCreate, we also override of the service because this actually extends the service, and we trigger the movies sync adapter by instantiating this class here and passing the context and the true boolean to the constructor of the sync adapter to also trigger the adapter. That's what this service is also doing. A quick look at the manifest. We need to tidy up things in the manifest, whereby we need the permission internet to read the sync settings. These are the permissions needed. The right sync settings, authenticate accounts. We need to add that as the permissions, and we need to lock in the service with a filter to the sync adapter. This metadata is for previous version of Android. So this sync adapter will also work downwards to the 3-point series of Android to actually get the sync adapter triggered. And we still have to do something quickly in the main activity, which is the launcher. We just need to get satisfied that we have our database created and the sync account created, and we have all data from the cloud also saved to its appropriate columns. We'll get to look at that. We need to trigger the movie sync adapter to initialize the sync adapter and pass this, which is the context. I also run it in from a fragment, the context. this is an activity. Use this to trigger the sync adapter, and we also instantiate the DB helper to help to create the database. This basically work for emulators, or once we are using a device to do your testing, the sync adapter will be triggered and it will still create down without even calling the DB helper to initialize. So with this now, we're quite sure that we have a sync adapter full working, and I will show you something which is actually, let's get to look at the debug. Let's get to look at the console to see our callback, or we call all the log messages, and at the same time I'll show this in the SQLite browser to also see the tables that we used. Let's look at the logcat messages to confirm our successful flow. First of all, get the database created successfully. Database created. We have that created successfully, and we start the sync. Let's see the sync. We start the sync. We also have the URL link over here, and we have the sync complete with 20 records inserted. We have it in a loop, another 20 records inserted. So that's fine. So with that, we find and we are sure that we had all our successful log messages callback intact, and we can also look at that in the DB browser. We have all records, the types, user rating, post path, overview. So we have all of the records, 40 of them, inserted into our DB. In our next tutorial, we're actually going to be using the loader to get those callback and have them displayed beautifully using the recycler view. Don't go anywhere. Thank you very much for hanging out with me throughout this video. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Have a wonderful time. Bye bye.